This is Billy Kay, welcoming you to Scotland's Black History, a series made in 2003, but updated now to include new research from people like Dr. Stephen Mullen of Glasgow University on Presbyterianism in the Caribbean.
Well, some of the research I've been doing is on the Scots Kirk of Kingston, which was established by the merchants and the planters, the sojourners who actually go to Kingston. It was the first Presbyterian kirk in the Caribbean in 1813. But one of the things that they do is they set up, and this probably challenges the conception that these guys were sojourners and they didn't set down roots. They're actually establishing, obviously, the permanent kirk, but also Sunday schools associated with the kirk. And the research I've been doing shows that the schools were intended for, not for the enslaved people, but for white children and mulatto children, as they called them. This would have been the children of Scots in the colonies, children with enslaved women, or free-coloured women as they would have called them. So, there's this exportation of Scottish Presbyterian ideals, but as well as this tradition of education, and they're teaching the young children. Through the Bible, they say that this is about, they want to replicate the good discipline and the good effects of Presbyterianism, and they're saying in the minutes, look at the lower orders behaviour in Scotland. We want to replicate this here.
Now we focus on the Presbyterianism the Scots took to Malawi. Programme 4, The Mission.
Malawi is a Scottish country in education. It is Scotland in exile in Africa because we had all the characteristics of being missionaries.
You must remember that the Scottish were seen as distinct, as separate from the colonialists. The Scottish were the missionaries, and so they were the champions of human values. They are looked at as people who came to help us establish our own integrity. Yes, so there's a lot of close affinity with the Scottish.
My name is MacLeod Piri.
My name is Macpherson Kambeta.
My name is Armstrong Elliot Koza.
The MP Brown Mbinganjira, Harrington Mcheze, and just a few of the people with Scottish African names I came across in Malawi. Testimony to the massive Scottish contribution made to the country once known as Nyasaland, and the love and affection inspired by our church missionaries. The missionaries themselves came in the inspirational wake of David Livingstone, who firmly established the Scots' reputation as African sympathisers when he wrote, "My great-grandfather fought for the old race of kings at Culloden when we were as the Xhosa on the frontier." According to his biographer, Dr. Andrew Ross, Livingstone's assertion that the Xhosa had the right to fight for their freedom against the British would have been regarded as revolutionary in the racist world of 1851. That is why he's revered in Africa.
The anniversary of his death, 1873, President Kaunda, that great nationalist leader, he led the celebrations and he called him the first freedom fighter. And in many ways, other people have seen him as the white patron saint of African nationalism.
When he died in Zambia at Chitambo, they carried his dead body, but you have to understand that his heart is buried here in Africa. The body is in Westminster Abbey, but the heart is in Africa. So people were challenged to say, can you go and start mission work where this great man, this great explorer, this great evangelist worked? So they came in. So people like Robert Laws, they had to fulfill the dream of this great explorer, David Livingstone.
The Reverend Ted Mwambira on Livingstone and the men from the Free Church and the Church of Scotland who arrived in the area of Lake Nyasa in 1875 and established the two great missions of Livingstonia and Blantyre in a region then in thrall to the depredations of the slave trade. Molly Jabala.
My great-grandfather was a slave trader He helped the slave traders, which was a bad thing. To my parents, he was very kind. He brought them slaves, but when Christianity came, they knew how bad that was and released all the slaves.
Slavery in people's living memory, and the Scottish African Lakes Company was set up to build an alternative economy. But there were huge cultural problems to overcome. Local tribes like the Tonga were dominated by the warriors of the Ngoni, who had migrated there from their Zulu homeland in South Africa. There were also more basic problems to confront. Reverend Wilfred Chunga.
The first missionaries had a problem to be accommodated by the local people. For example, some people, when they saw the missionaries for the first time, they actually fled. They ran away from the missionaries. They thought they were ghosts.
The first place where they opened the station at Njuyu, the people gave it a local name, Ekusinda Nyaliweni, which means that it was an area where shit was being spread. That's why in 11 years they had managed to baptize only 2 converts. So in terms of marriage, the Western religion discourages polygamy. And amongst the Ngoni people, someone who had several wives, someone with several children, was regarded as a great man. So many people paid a very negative attitude towards Christianity. That's why even going to school, the Ngoni people did not go to school. They were refusing it. They thought their young men who were required to fight for them to carry out the raids would no longer do that.
To Africans, I think they were also looking at the missionaries as a shield in a way against each other. The people around here must definitely have been under the threats of the Ngoni warriors. They looked at the missionaries as a much more superior, I think, force compared to the Ngonis.
Scotch Kondowe and Misengo Mulungu. Many of the Free Church missionaries came from working class backgrounds where alcohol abuse was feared and temperance principles were strong. Rose Chiwambo.
Here in the northern region, they rarely completely stopped drinking. If anybody is converted to be a Christian, he should not drink beer. And it is so up to now.
Drinking beer was all wrong. Now, later on, when people from Africa went to Scotland, they found the same Christians drinking whiskey, and they thought that they were betrayed.
The Reverend Major Hyson Gondwe on the culture shock when the missionaries started to take their converts home with them. But if there is ambivalence about some of the missionaries' responses to aspects of African culture, for several million Malawian Christians, there's nothing but praise and celebration of the Scottish legacy.
For them to actually come and introduce Christianity, which straight away gave us education, gave us health, gave us this brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. I think that's one of the greatest contributions the church has ever given to us.
I experienced the passion for the Presbyterian faith over a remarkable weekend at the old mission station of Ekwindeni. And this is the joyous dawning of Easter Sunday in the heart of Africa. A resurrection march calling the people to join and celebrate the miracle. The march has now stopped at a prayer house. They've said prayers and they're beginning again on the march back home. There's mothers with wee babies strapped to their backs. There's teenagers. There's grannies. There's women in their women's guild, white and black. The sun's risen, and they're now commemorating again the rising of Jesus Christ. The Resurrection March is now coming to an end. And now that the sun is up, I've noticed a number of women are wearing a chitenji, the wraparound cotton skirt that the women wear here, all multicoloured. Some of them are wearing one that says the Scottish Mission in Malawi, 125 years, 1875 to 2000. With a symbol of the church, the Celtic cross, amidst a blue African background. Very much a symbol of the two cultures that have created this remarkable fusion here in Malawi. The 100th Psalm sung in Tumbuka, one of the constant reminders of home, experienced by Helen Scott, a teacher and missionary with the Church of Scotland in Ekwendeni.
You're not allowed to forget it. Malawians think of Scotland as their mother, and they're always talking about the Scots people as their mothers and their fathers and the people who gave them all this, so they don't really allow you to forget it. The church itself has a very sort of Scottish feel to it, and at the moment there's a Kirk session going on, and we're in the communion season, and we sing the Amens at the end of the service, and we do all sorts of things which are very Scottish.
Do the Malawians refer to it as the Kirk session?
Yes. They're very strong on church administration, and the Kirk session is a very big part of church life. Because the church was set up here at the end of the 19th century, and it was the Free Church of Scotland missionaries who were here, and they brought with them the traditions in Scotland at that time. And whereas now in Scotland a lot of things have moved on, here they haven't. They preserve the traditions very strongly.
They even have precentors in the church.
They do.
The early missionaries did not introduce the beating of drum or playing of a guitar. And we had a problem when we were introducing these things in early 80s. They were saying, why introducing these things? The great man, Lopetros, he didn't use it. Eremze, he didn't use it. Macropride, he didn't use it. Donald Fraser, he didn't use it. Can you prove to us that these are perfect things and divine things that you can use in the sanctuary? So we're having a problem. People, they want to see everything to be Scottish.
The African is by nature a dancer, is by nature a very joyful person. He dances as he worships, and I would like Africans to worship God that way.
While I appreciate all the good things that Church of Scotland have done to Malawi to come and evangelize the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, I want to talk about the uniform which they left. They left a black craco shirt, they left a black cassock, and they left a black preaching gown, which we are supposed to use at the Holy Communion and on Sunday. I want to tell you that we sweat in these colors. How I wish they came with the white and not the black.
Ted Mwambira. The pluses and negatives of the Scottish legacy are taught in the history class at Ekwendeni Girls' School.
All right. What are some of the good impacts that we can see as of now in relation to the coming of the Scottish missionaries in Malawi?
The missionaries built schools, and also they built some hospitals.
That's very good, because you are at a mission school here.
Politically, although the Scottish missions successfully petitioned the British government to intercede and protect the region from Portuguese encroachment, the missions never envisaged large-scale colonisation and settlement, although that was fast becoming the European norm.
People often forget how quick it was. In 1885, most of Africa was ruled by African chiefs, Muslim emirs, and so on. 1895, the whole of Africa is ruled by Europe. 10 years. It really was a scramble. And Livingstone's dreams in some ways were over. Although through the mission schools, Africans caught a glimpse of that dream, and that's part of the roots of African nationalism. I remember an old friend of mine, Orton Chirwa, who became the first Malawian to become a QC, he used to say, I love doing Scottish history. People used to say, it's silly for African boys to do Scottish history. No, it isn't, he said. William Wallace inspired us. The Declaration of Our Birth inspired us. This was revolutionary stuff, even if the teachers didn't always understand it.
I would say very genuinely that the motivation of the Scottish missionaries in Malawi was much more positive, by which I don't mean it was perfect, and certainly its attitude to African culture left a lot to be desired. But there was a very egalitarian understanding of the ability of the African to progress, and indeed the first political movements in Malawi were started with the approval of the missionaries and on mission territory. One interesting little fact is that the first British colonial governor of Malawi, a man called Harry Johnston, once called the Scottish missionaries in Malawi Her Majesty's official opposition, because he felt that they were always getting in his hair and objecting to colonial policies and so forth. From the colonial point of view, there was clearly an understanding that the Scottish missionaries were on the side of the African.
To be a governor, you represented the Queen. You are a little demigod. And every little DC also was therefore a demigod. He lived within a system. And away from that system, living with the people, were the missionaries. And therefore, when you go to any station, you'll find that those living up on the hill were the colonial masters, but coming to reach down to the people and building schools and living with them were the missionaries, especially the Scottish ones.
David Rubadiri, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Malawi, and T. Jack Thompson of the University of Edinburgh, who taught at Livingstonia after Malawian independence, when the curriculum still had a strong Scottish element. But even more important were the centuries-old ideals of mass literacy and egalitarianism, which imbued the culture they took to Africa.
Malawi is a Scottish country in education. It is Scotland in exile in Africa, because we had all the characteristics of being missionaries. We felt it was a call from God more than a profession. So we had many of those who qualified at Livingstone at that time, spread all over Central Africa.
For most of these missionaries, education was valuable in itself. And indeed, I've come across exam papers from Livingstonia 100 years ago when the best students were answering questions on Greek philosophy and calculus and algebra. So while we may think that that's inappropriate for the modern Africa, the other side of that coin is that most of these Scots missionaries had a very egalitarian view of the capabilities of the African.
Oh, it was wonderful, because apart from getting the academic education, we were also trained morally and spiritually, and the discipline was very good. So it was not just getting the education, but looking forward to with very high ideals.
It's interesting, the attempts to modify the curriculum were resisted by the African parents, partly because they liked it, but also they made the shrewd point. Who has power in Southern Africa? Remember, so many Malawians worked in the South African mines. Who has power? The whites have. What education do the whites have? That's the education we must have.
It was a center of the whole education concerning man's life, because you had engineering there, carpentry, you had a theological school. Every training was done at Livingstonia. And those people who came from there were completely corruption-free. Corruption-free. Up till now, in any department where we find people who were at Livingstonia once, we expect no corruption there, because our first and foremost concern was service to the people.
Harrington Mchese and McMinn Mulaga on the remarkable institution at Livingstonia, which is still the principal hospital and educational establishment in northern Malawi, and which at one time drew students from all over East Africa. Kenneth Kaunda's father was just one of the influential students who studied there from Zambia. It was created on the beautiful Kondowe Plateau by Robert Laws, an astonishing man who in one of his rare journeys home studied hydroelectric power and installed the first plant in East Africa when he returned. Like many of the missionaries, he has attained near legendary status in the oral tradition.
There's a story to say when Dr. Laws, he was speaking, even the lions, even animals, they could tremble. They could run away. So there's a legend to say he's a man who had a very strong voice.
The one thing that these early mission situations did produce was real characters. I guess the simplistic way of saying it would be, if you weren't tough, you didn't survive. And so people like Laws are real characters. And even today in Malawi, people still remember him, some of the very old people. I've talked to people who tell me interesting stories about Laws. And there was one story about how Laws started to supervise workers at 6 o'clock in the morning, and at about 7:30, he went home for his breakfast each morning. But the local story was that when he went home for his breakfast, he left his walking stick sitting on a rock. And the local superstition was that the walking stick could see whether you were working hard or not, and that when Laws came back, he would ask the stick. And if you hadn't been working hard, then you were in trouble. So obviously that's an apocryphal story, but it illustrates the way in which local people regarded Laws with great respect, but also with a modicum of fear almost.
Donald Fraser used to be carried on a machira. Machira is almost like a stretcher. So 4 people could carry the machira, and the missionary could be sitting. And when he was approaching from a rural area, returning to the mission, Loudon, could sing, "Oh, Karuwango Chenjera, Wona Karuwango Chenjera," meaning, here comes a strange man. To them, a white man looked strange. And so they could sing, "Be ready, here comes a strange man." Watch out.
Chiseki Seki was Fraser's nickname, which means the one who is always laughing. Almost all of these missionaries had some sort of nickname or other. Laws's wife was called in the local language Chitumbuka Nyakaru Njochi, and Nyakaru Njochi means the woman who stings like a bee, and I think that says it all.
In the south of the country, the Church of Scotland mission at Blantyre was led by people such as Henry Henderson and David Clement Scott, both popular men with a reputation for honouring African tradition. I met Eric Kabandi and Molly Jabala in a remarkable Scots kirk.
We are inside a church known as St. Michael's and All Angels Church in Blantyre. Now, this church was built by David Scott. But before he built it, there was a prayer house beside here. It was known as the prayer house of the Church of Scotland. David Scott worked very hard and started building this church. People criticized him. They said the church was too big. Who will go into the church? Today it is too small. We have so many services to accommodate the people around Blantyre who come to worship. And people called this place Kwa Scotty, to say at Scott's. We are going to Scott's place. Twajire Kwa Scott.
I would like to mention something that's important. Here on the communion table, there's a book rest. This is actually made from a tree of the Ilala country, that is Chitambo, Zambia, at which was buried the heart of Dr. David Livingstone, as you remember. From that tree, they made this. It's special. So it means the heart of David Livingstone rests in this church.
The heart of Livingstone and the soul of Scotland in Blantyre, and everywhere I went in Malawi and beyond. For Livingstone will never be forgotten.
South of the Sahara, throughout Africa, places named by Europeans with European names have all been changed, except the town of Livingstone in Zambia, the town of Blantyre in Malawi, and the Synod of Livingstonia in Malawi. Now, these three names have been preserved, and no one has ever suggested they should be changed. Everything else in Malawi and Zambia is changed back to African names. Those three names are there because Livingstone is remembered as somebody who was pro the cause, as Kaunda said, the first freedom fighter.
What is perhaps more astonishing is that the Scots continued to enhance their pro-African credentials until Malawi gained her independence when the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland was dissolved in 1964. Rose Chiwambo was politically active and recalls the fundamental difference in attitude between the Scots and the majority of the Europeans in Nyasaland.
There was a lot of difference because most of the colonial British, they behaved like settlers. We were fighting for our independence, and to them it really meant as if we were chasing them away.
The campaign against federation had much more strength in Scotland than it had in Britain as a whole. As Nathan Shamirira, a young journalist, said to me, the trouble is, when we complain, who listens? When you Nyasas complain, Scotland complains as well. And there's a real truth in that.
The Reverend Andrew Ross was one of many Scottish churchmen actively engaged in the Nyasaland African Congress, while Colin Cameron was the only non-African MP in the first post-independence Parliament. Both men stood out when Dr. Banda's leadership descended into brutal dictatorship, and both were spirited out of the country to save their lives.
We lost everything. We just managed to get out with what we stood on. So everything that we had and built up overall our married life was lost. But the family were safe, and that was more important at that time.
That was a terrible thing, that in that crisis, my white skin still gave me a privilege. My black friends died, I only got thrown out.
For many Malawians, the Scottish connection has been crucial in communicating with the outside world in time of crisis, and a very special bond has been forged between the people of both countries. Here, David Rubadiri is speaking of the Scottish friends who shared the political struggle to create a lasting democracy in Malawi. But in my experience, he could be speaking for Malawi itself about all of the Scottish missionaries who have graced his country in the present and the past.
The friends that we knew and lived with are people who, though they have retired back in Scotland, are people who are in spirit with us here. I know it doesn't make sense to put it that way. What I'm saying is that when you have lived and experienced at a spiritual and human level, human issues and problems being asked and answered, those you've experienced all these questions and answers with never leave. And so, though I know that they are in Scotland, each time I move around Malawi, I feel them around because they are part and parcel of a great experience.